Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormack. In today's episode, I'll be talking with Ali Geren. Ali holds an MA from Missouri State University and is currently pursuing an MFA degree in poetry at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Her work has appeared in Caustic Frolic and in Moon City Review as part of a creative writing contest for Missouri State University students. Ali, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so you're an experienced poet and you're currently attending a really interesting program at the University of Arkansas that I'm excited to talk about. But first, do you remember the first time you realized the power of words and the power of writing?
I think for me, the first time that I kind of realized the impact that my words could have on others was when I was about 13 years old in 8th grade. I wrote a poem. It was an awful poem. It was terrible. It was like rhyming quatrains, awful stuff. But I wrote this poem and my instructor, my teacher, came and she was like, "This is really, really good, Ali. We should like try to get it published." And we ended up getting it published in like some little piddly like anthology for young writers or whatever. And that's not something that I talk about because that poem is embarrassing for me. But I think that was kind of the moment that I realized that poetry is something that impacts people and that people can have a reaction to.
Yeah. How old did you say you were?
I was 13.
13 years old.
13 years old, yeah.
And you have a publication under your belt.
We don't talk about that, though.
So did you find that your teachers were pretty supportive back then? Like supportive of like the arts and writing, things like that?
I think so. I wasn't exposed to a lot of contemporary writing, poetry specifically, contemporary poetry through my like elementary, high school, middle school, all that education. Mm-hmm. The first time that I realized, I had that publication, but the first time that I realized that poetry was something that you could do with your life was whenever I got into college. And I think that is part of growing up in a really small town. In a relatively rural area, we didn't have a lot of funding for arts, things like that. So I think I had teachers through the years who were supportive, but as a whole, I don't know that, I was introduced to anything more contemporary than like Edgar Allan Poe. Which is not,
right.
Not contemporary. So that was the most contemporary exposure that I had in school, in high school and things like that. So I had that experience when I was 13 in 8th grade, but I think that I didn't really realize that poetry was something that I could do with my life until I got into higher education.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I had a pretty similar experience. I'm from a small town as well, working class. Like my dad did construction most of his life, and my mom was a kindergarten teacher in a small rural school. I'm curious, growing up in that small town, did that affect your writing at all or your worldview in general? Like, do you find those things creeping into your writing now that you're writing contemporary poetry?
Yeah, I don't know that I write so much about like living in a small town as I do. It more impacts, I think, the nature of my poetry. I tend to be a very narrative poet. My focus tends to be on like accessible poetry. And I think that growing up where I did and in the environment that I did has really impacted that and influenced that. Both of my parents are nurses, and my mom has said over and over, she doesn't really get the whole creative writing thing. And she's always like, anytime we try to talk about poetry, she's like, well, I just don't understand that stuff. I just don't understand that stuff. But then like when she like has the opportunity to read a poem, like she does understand it. I think that the idea of poetry as like this thing that exists only for like academic people who sit in an office all day and read dusty books, that has its place, but I think that in order for us to survive, poetry has to become more of an accessible, I think it took me 10 years to get through undergrad. And I think that if I had started a little, or if I had been exposed to more contemporary poetry in high school, it wouldn't have taken me that long. Or maybe it would have. I don't, maybe I'm just indecisive. But I think that growing up where I did and in the environment that I did has definitely influenced the way that I write, even if it doesn't directly influence my subject matter.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I mean, I've had a very similar experience. I think the idea of like maybe people from your hometown not really understanding why you're going into creative writing. I don't know about you. I always get the same thing when I tell people, oh, I'm studying creative writing in an MFA program. The response is usually, well, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah. And then what? So I don't know.
But,
No,
it's like,
yeah.
it's the blue collar mentality of,
Absolutely.
if you've grown up in an environment where, work is about survival, like instead of like personal fulfillment in some sense, not to say that like blue collar jobs aren't personally fulfilling, because I've worked them and I find them to be, but there is like a different mindset there, I think.
Absolutely.
So when you say accessible, like, what do you mean by that?
I think that when I say accessible, in my mind, it means something like a narrative-based poem. So not every poem has to necessarily tell a story, but I think that if you can find the story in a poem, it makes it easier to understand. People understand stories. Those are like, have been around forever. And so I think that a narrative-based poem and a poem that like not dumbs down the language, but doesn't use unnecessarily flowery language. I don't know. I've worked, so Missouri State University, that program is very narrative based. And then I came to the University of Arkansas, and there's a little bit of everything here. I think one of the things that makes our program unique is that we kind of touch, I work with formalists. There's a lot of abstract poets, things like that. So, I have an appreciation for that style of work, but I think that that's the kind of work that my parents and people who dismiss poetry as this thing that they don't understand, that's the kind of work that they're encountering, rather than work that kind of describes a shared experience or tells a story or works to express some kind of an emotion.
Yeah, I did an interview recently with the poet Sasha Debevic McKinney, and she had this this really kind of strong question where she said, kind of like a question for poets. Do you want to make change, or do you want to show off how pretty your words are? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's room for both, right, in some way. But yeah, there is this question of, are you writing your poetry or your stories for the privileged few who have the ability to go to a graduate program or to an MFA program, or are you trying to reach out to these communities that have felt maybe excluded from this kind of art? So when you're writing poetry, do you have your reader in mind when you're writing? Are you imagining someone that's going to be reading that poem?
Not that happens more in editing, I think, or in revision. Whenever the piece exists on the page, whenever I'm like looking at things that I can change or adjust, I think that's when I'm thinking about audience more. Writing for me tends to be just like, it sounds so cliche, but like a form of expression. I think growing up where the Southwest Missouri is very conservative, very Christian, and I think that my childhood kind of mirrored that. And now, 10 years or so out from that, I think I have a different perspective on that, and poetry gives me a way to kind of process through the things that I used to believe and used to feel and am now experiencing. And then like life experience, I think I listened to Mary's episode interview with you, and she said, I'm not going to be able to say it as well as she said it, but she said, poetry gives us this, or writing in general gives us this way to kind of make something beautiful out of something that wasn't. And I think that that's really profound. And I think that that's why, or what like draws me to write. And then my audience comes in revision, I think. But they're always, I don't know, maybe they are there while I'm writing, but not consciously.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you were saying about narrative poetry being a way to tap into some kind of human emotion or experience that transcends maybe socioeconomic classes and backgrounds, to maybe become more accessible to more people. So, I mean, you talked a little bit about growing up in Southern Missouri. You went to MSU. While you were there, you published this poem called Delinquent Motherhood, which I read, and it's really good. It's in Moon City Review. And you that was published as part of a creative writing contest for MSU students. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. So every year Missouri State does, or Moon City Review, but that's Moon City Review belongs to Missouri State. So they do a contest for undergraduate and graduate students. Anybody can submit something. You can submit a poem. They do poem, short story, and then they weren't at the time, but they are now doing nonfiction. And I've submitted a couple of years, and then I submitted this one year, and the guest judge happened to be Sarah Freely, who is one of my personal favorite poets. And she selected it, and yeah, it got published.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that year. So, man, to get published is, exciting enough, but for one of your favorite poets to be the one who chose it.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I think so. She was the judge because her manuscript was selected for publication by Moon City Review. And it's called Sad Math. It's an incredible collection. But I think what she talks about in Sad Math, one of the themes is like teenage pregnancy and teenage motherhood. And I don't know, delinquent motherhood, to me, that's just like one piece of it. That's just like the match or whatever metaphor you want to lay over it. But I think that like that kind of shared experience between the two of us kind of, I don't know. I think I feel like a kinship with her now in a really weird way.
Yeah. And that goes back to the power of words, the power of writing, because there are those writers out there, those things that you read where you just feel, they could be from the other side of the world, but you have some kind of shared human experience that connects you with them. So I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about writing things that are accessible, right? Yeah. Things that all these communities could read and connect to and find some, kindred connection to the writer and to the material. That's great. Yeah, I really like that poem, Delinquent Motherhood. I mean, I think your ability to look at the struggles of small town America and distill that larger issue into an examination of like your own family dynamics was really well done. I have a lot of respect for nonfiction writers because, you're writing, this poem has, there are nonfiction elements to it. And I write fiction, so it's a little bit different. But if you're writing nonfiction, you really have to put yourself out there. And you mentioned that your community is pretty conservative Christian, right? So I'm wondering, was it hard to write that poem? Was it hard to publish that poem knowing that people in your community would read it? Or were you excited for them to see that perspective?
So I didn't think about that. So I wrote the poem came about, I was talking to Marcus Cafagna, who is one of the instructors at Missouri State and one of my mentors. I was talking to him before class one day. We were just like chit-chatting. I don't even remember like what we were talking about, but I mentioned kind of like offhand to him that 1 in 10 of the girls, I graduated in a class of 200, and 1 in 10 of the girls in my graduating class were either pregnant or had been pregnant at some point during their high school career. And I just kind of mentioned that offhand to him. And his reaction to that was, he was like shocked. And then he was like, maybe you have a poem there. And I was like, I don't know about that. But there was a poem there. And so I turned it in, and I wasn't like expecting it to win. And then then it did win. And I didn't like think about the implications of it being published, because at that time I was not out to my family. I was out to my friends and like things like that, but I kind of kept those two worlds separate. And so I didn't think about the implications of being published and what like people being able to read that part of my life would entail. And so then I like told my mom, I like texted my mom and I was like, hey, guess what I won? And then she was like, I can't wait to read it. And then I was like, oh shit. Now she's going to read this poem. So that's how I initially like didn't want to share it with her. Initially I was like, no, I don't want you to read it. Like, it's personal, whatever. But then she did read it. She got her hands on a copy of it. And that's kind of like the first time that I came out to my mom. I say the first time because like that happened. She texted me Bible verses for like 3 days. And then like, we never spoke of it again until like very recently. But, and so like now I'm out to my family and everything is fine and chill. And my mom and I are in a much better place now. But I think that, if I could go back and do it again, I don't know that I would come out in a poem to my parents. But that poem I think will always have like a very special place in my heart because of the circumstances surrounding it and kind of like how it impacted things. So I was kind of like mixed feelings about it being published. Like I was really excited. My friends were very excited for me and my family was excited. And then there was like this moment of realization where it's like, oh, okay, now I actually have to like prove to them that it, that it did get published and that it exists in the world.
So having that hindsight, do you have advice for any writers who are thinking about publishing really personal stuff like that? If you want to, I'm not here to tell anybody how to come out to their family. Sure.
I think that is a personal decision and something that like you should do whenever you feel ready and supported. But I would not recommend doing it. Like I would not recommend handing your mom a book that has your poem in it and being like, here you go. I'm not going to warn you at all. This is what it is. I don't know. I don't regret having it published and I don't regret sharing it with my mom. But I think that I could have made that transition a little bit smoother for everybody involved.
Well, it's a beautiful poem and I read it and I connected to it. And I immediately started thinking about growing up in my small town and the teenage pregnancies that were prevalent there. Not 1 in 10, that is a shocking number, but that happened a lot. And even, like in my own family and the way that people in a small community handle those kind of things. Yeah, it can be difficult, but I love the poem and
Thank you.
I'm so glad you published it. And I bet people who read it are, really connecting with it.
Yeah.
And I bet it helped you get into the Arkansas MFA program because it is a great poem.
Thank you.
And Arkansas, so let's talk about the program a bit. It's one of the oldest programs in the country. Mm-hmm. From what I can tell from the website, they offer degrees in poetry, fiction, and translation. Mm-hmm. The program's pretty unique in that it's a 4-year program, but it's a really good program. Several poet laureates have come out of there, a whole slew of other prize winners. So was there anything specific that drew you to that program?
Honestly, it is free to apply to until you get in. So that was anybody who has been through or is going through the application process for MFAs. It gets very extensive very quickly. And I was on a train from St. Louis to Kansas City. And I like pulled it up and I was like, I don't know if I want to go to Arkansas, but it's free. So like, why not? And then I got in. So that's what drew me to it initially. I also liked that it was very close. It's about 3 hours from my hometown. So I'm very close to family still. And it was one of the only places that I got in. So it seemed like a good fit.
I mean, application fees are extensive mm-hmm. when applying to MFA programs. I think on average, applicants apply to 9 or 10 programs, and that you could easily spend $1,000 just applying to 9 or 10 programs, right? So to have a really good program that doesn't have any application fees that you have to pay until you're accepted is a big draw, mm-hmm. And good information for anyone listening thinking about applying to Arkansas. So, judging by the website, it looks like the program also has a reading series, a visiting writer series, and the Arkansas International Literary Journal. Can you tell us at all about those? Do you have any experience working with those or participating in those?
No, I have not had the opportunity to work on the journal as yet. Our visiting writers, it got a little bit messed up because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Our poet was supposed to come this spring, and she ended up not being able to come because of COVID. But it is, I mean, I think that, and I know that, so we're kind of in the news right now because we're petitioning for an increase in our stipend. But I don't want people to think that I am at all like ungrateful or unhappy. This program is excellent and it's wonderful, and I'm so happy to be here. And it's given me the opportunity to kind of like progress in my own work in a way that I didn't think was possible until I did it.
Well, yeah. Well, let's talk about money a bit. I mean, Arkansas is a fully funded program. Mm-hmm. So MFA students are mostly working as teaching assistants, from what I can tell, in return for a stipend and tuition remission. And the stipend is a bit below average, probably. It's $12,500 per school year. And then how much teaching are you doing as part of that TA position?
We take 2 courses a semester, so 6 hours of teaching, and then like everything that goes with teaching. So lesson planning and grading and, all that good stuff, student emails. But we teach 2 courses. And then there's also an option you can work as like a tutor. Or there's one girl that does like the social media, that's part of her graduate. So there's like other options, but the vast majority of us are teaching 2 classes.
Okay. And, you mentioned that there's a petition to increase that stipend at the University of Arkansas. What has the response been? Has there been any response yet?
Nothing as of yet. We sent it last Wednesday and no response yet. We sent out the letter on last Wednesday, a week from today. So the 1st? We sent it out on the 1st. And then on Friday, there was like a department-wide email that basically said the stipend was staying the same for the coming school year. But no like specific response. That seemed to be just like, had all kinds of information. Like, this is when we're starting. This is like what's going on with the university. Oh, and by the way, graduate assistants are still going to be paid the same amount that they were paid last year. But we have not had a response from Chancellor Steinmetz yet.
Well, it is a tricky situation, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
There's been a lot of push around the country at different programs, not just MFA programs, but graduate programs in general, for increased stipends, covering health insurance, things like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you said this, because I think for a lot of people, they might be afraid that the school would think, oh, this person's not grateful to be here. They're not enjoying the program. They want to change things. But really, from my point of view, it's more about the purpose of these programs, which is to give you the time and the space to work on your writing and become the best writer you can. And if people are struggling to get by, that could interfere with that. So I'm curious, are people in your program, are you and others working other jobs on the side in the summer? And if so, how does that affect your writing?
I work another job. I work in a local ER. I work in registration. I am working full-time this summer, and then during the school year, I cut back a little bit. I work about 30 hours a week at my hospital job, and then teach 2 classes, take 3 classes. So it's hard to find time to write, I think. And like, it's kind of a double-edged sword though, right? Because I write a little bit about like that aspect of my life, like working in healthcare. That is something that I like draw subject material from on occasion. So I have like that really rich resource of here's all these stories that I get to tell and opportunity or things that I get to talk about working in healthcare that really a lot of poets don't have the opportunity to talk about. But at the same time, like working 30 hours a week and trying to teach and trying to like take my own classes is exhausting.
Yeah. And I always say that as a writer, you need the mental space. Like, you need time to just not have anything on your mind in order to really tap into, you know, your creativity and to get inspiration and to start these poems or stories. And if you're working 30 hours a week on the side from a 30-hour teaching position, I can't imagine. It must be really hard. But okay, so let's talk a bit about the workshops.
Bit, yeah.
You know, yeah, because I'm sure that there are a lot of fantastic things happening at Arkansas that you're really enjoying. So, being a 4-year program, I'm curious how many students are in the program at a given time, and like what the workshops look like, if they're big or small. If you're taking classes with students who are in their 4th year while you're in your 1st year, things like that.
So our class sizes, so our cohort, they average about 10 people. I think there's 11 in my cohort, and that's poetry, fiction, and translation included. So there's 11 of us across all 3 of the MFA programs. And so there's about 40, give or take a few, students in the, like, overall in the MFA. We take classes, we don't take workshop with anybody in their 4th year. 4th years don't take workshop. They're working on their thesis. Mm-hmm. But we do take workshop with like 1st through 3rd years. And it's kind of dicey because they limit the workshop to 12 people, sometimes 14 people. And so you don't take a workshop every semester. They just don't have the class space for that. But it is combined with other cohorts. And then like our other classes, like our literature classes, our craft classes, things like that, we have people from 1st through 4th years in those with us.
That's interesting, because I think most people would say the smaller the workshop, the better, really. Mm-hmm. But if there's not enough space to get in there every semester, that might be a bit frustrating, I guess. But so how many workshops do you take over the course of the whole program then?
Ooh, I want to say I'm counting semesters.
Yeah.
I think.
So outside of the thesis year, then I guess there would be 6 semesters.
Yeah, so like 4-ish, mm-hmm. Depending. I think it's 4. Gosh, you're quizzing me on things that I should.
Sorry, putting you on the spot here.
No, you're fine. I think it's 4. It might be 5. I know there's definitely one semester where you don't have to take a workshop.
Okay. Well, let's talk a bit about the writing that you've done this year. You said you've been writing some poetry related to your work as a nurse, but you also write a lot of poetry related to pop culture, yes. Specifically Quentin Tarantino in some of your poems. So I'm curious about this. What is it about his work that inspires you to write poetry?
I don't know. So I got sick. I had the flu and then I had a kidney infection like over Christmas one year. And so I spent like 4 weeks in bed, and I was like scrolling through Netflix, and I had never seen a Quentin Tarantino film in my life. And I was on Netflix and I saw Inglourious Basterds, and I love World War II films. So I was like, I'll give it a shot. And I like fell in love. Like I watched it and then I watched it again, like immediately after finishing it, like roll credits, go back to the beginning, and we're going to watch it again. And then like I watched it like every day. Like it became like almost obsessive because something about that film just like, I don't know if it was like Brad Pitt. I don't know if it was Christoph Waltz, or something about it was just so like, just totally had me obsessed. And so I got like out of that rut, and I was like, I have to see what else this man has done. And then I watched like every Tarantino film that I could find. So I watched Kill Bill. And then I wrote both parts, and then I wrote a poem that was kind of a dialogue between me as a writer and then the bride as a character. And then there was also a little bit of Uma Thurman in there as well, kind of like communicating with us. And I don't know. And then like from then it's just been like this constant obsession. Like I go back to it and I go back to it and I go back to it. And something about Quentin Tarantino's work just really speaks to me. I don't know if it's like the way that he does things like he does in Pulp Fiction, where he kind of like jumps around in the story, but you can still like understand. And I don't know if that's what I'm drawn to, is that he has this accessible quality about his work that I kind of want to emulate, but he does it without like sacrificing any, nobody's going to say that Pulp Fiction, someone might say Pulp Fiction is a bad film. But I think that it kind of changed the film industry is what I'm getting at. And Quentin Tarantino did something with that film that nobody had ever done before. And I think that is really attractive to me. I don't know, something about his way of storytelling speaks to me as a writer.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to our earlier conversation in a way, like trying to bridge that gap between being accessible, but also pushing the boundaries of the art form. I mean, Pulp Fiction does that. I find it to be one of those films that is accessible. Anybody can watch it and really enjoy it and understand it, but it is groundbreaking in the way that it's edited and the way that it's put together. So yeah, I could totally see that. I love his films too. Yeah.
I don't like him as a person. I think he as a person is an asshole, but his films, I don't know, man, like they changed my life.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk to you about that, Quentin Tarantino as an asshole, because I mean, he hasn't really been completely on the right side of the history in the last several years, or maybe ever. I don't know, but he had a close relationship with Harvey Weinstein, and made some questionable comments related to the Me Too movement. And I know you're aware of these things, so I'm curious what you think about the idea of separating the art from the artist, like being able to appreciate the art even when the artist might be an asshole. Because for me, it's I think of like David Foster Wallace. I love his writing. I've read a lot of it. I think it's fascinating and really well done. But from all accounts, he was terrible, specifically to women. And Mary Carr had come out a few years ago and said that he had been really abusive in their relationship. So I don't know. Is it possible to still appreciate the art and separate it from the artist, or is there? I don't know. Like, is there some culpability in appreciating art by someone who might not be such a great person?
Yeah, that's something that I still grapple with. And continue to grapple with, because I think to a certain extent, no, you can't separate art from artists. This terrible person, regardless of what they made, is still a terrible person. But I think that also the message that we get in a lot of his films is really interesting, especially considering like his treatment and his historical treatment of women. So his relationship with Harvey Weinstein, the things that he has said to Uma Thurman, his treatment of Diane Kruger during the filming of Inglourious Bastards. Like, he doesn't have a great track record with women, but then in his films, specifically, for example, Kill Bill, both Part 1 and Part 2, we see this kind of like revenge narrative from the bride where she kind of like takes back control of her life. She gets revenge. She gets exactly what she wanted by the end of the film. And I think that kind of story that we get of this woman taking her power back, not that redeems him in any sense of the word, but I think that kind of makes me pause and be like, well, can we understand his work as like this narrative of really bad things happened to me and now I am like stronger because of them, I've come back from them, whatever, even in the wake of Quentin Tarantino's questionable activities?
Well, I mean, I think that this conversation makes your poem, Tell It to the Tourists, even more fascinating. And I know that you have a copy with you, so do you mind reading it now?
No, I don't mind. So Tell It to the Tourists has an epigraph that I'm going to read. It is from Reservoir Dogs. Tell it to the tourists. Time out, Green Bay. Tell that fucking bullshit to the tourists. 1. There are no women in Reservoir Dogs except the waitress in the beginning, the one Mr. Pink doesn't want to tip, and the black girl Mr. White and Mr. Orange carjack. 2. When they remake it, they call them Madam. Jennifer Lawrence plays Madame Orange, a tough cop who dresses exclusively in wife beaters and leather pants. She gets shot in the boob instead of the gut, a statement about femininity and the sacrifices lady cops make. It is also an excuse to show Jennifer Lawrence's tits on the big screen. 3. Instead of Like a Virgin, they discuss the sexism in Robin Thicke's blurred lines, the way he assumes. It's not about consent, Madame Brown says. It's about ownership. 4. They use the word fuck exactly 200 times, which is approximately 75% of the times it is used in the original. This is a statement on the amount of money women make, but it's lost on the audience, too mesmerized watching women scream fuck 200 times, watching Jennifer Lawrence's tits bleed. 5. Meryl Streep plays the mastermind, a hard-ass criminal named Jolene. Everyone gets to see it in theaters to watch a 50-foot Meryl Streep scream fuck and flick her cigar, missing the ashtray. 6. Natalie Portman, when offered the role of Madame Blonde, declines, citing ethical conflicts. Mila Kunis takes the role instead, throws gasoline on some up-and-coming actress just trying to get her start. Critics hate the torture scene. Mila Kunis goes too far, they say. She lacks Madsen's control. Nobody likes a crazy bitch. 7. Scarlett Johansson plays Madame Pink, decked out in pink lipstick and pink nails and a powder pink suit. Her hair is pink too, because Reservoir Dames is set in 2019, and pink hair is acceptable. Celebrated even. Totally badass. Everyone wants to fuck her, which is part of the appeal. Critics say, Scarlett Johansson brings something Steve Buscemi never could. 8. Critics hate it, despite all the big names it carries. The world isn't ready for bad women getting their revenge. Reservoir Dames lacks heart, they say. Nothing at its center but blood. 9. Julia Roberts, the director and Madame Brown, tips her sunglasses down sliding into a car. We're all blood at the center, she says. 10. At the end, when Madame Orange and Madame White roll around on the floor, bleeding together, you hope Sandra Bullock, who else, won't shoot Jennifer Lawrence, but she will. It hurts. Critics hate that they died, like Orange and White should have ridden off into the sunset, a lesbian Bonnie and Clyde, Sandra Bullock at the wheel of a yellow Cadillac, titless Jennifer Lawrence moaning fuck, fuck, fuck in the backseat.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, here we have like this. I love that it's like the premise is like a feminist retelling of Reservoir Dogs, but like the really important messages, like the fact that women make 75% of men, are so buried in it that it's not feminist at all. Really, like that stuff just goes over the audience's head, and what you end up with is just women being objectified on screen, which is like what we've always had, right? Mm-hmm. So I was curious if that idea of accessibility was in your head when you were writing this.
I think it's fun to write. I mean, I like poems that address things that are like issues and that are serious, but like aren't afraid to have like a chuckle or two in them. And I think that that's part of accessibility too. People like things that are funny and that can make them laugh. And I think that was definitely part of it. I kind of wanted to do this. I was watching Reservoir Dogs and I was like, there are no women in it. Where are the women in this movie? Like the only women that exist in this movie are this waitress and this black woman that like gets carjacked. That's it. Those are the only two women. And I think, I wanted to kind of write about that. So I don't know, as far as accessibility goes, I think I was thinking about that more in revision than I was in writing, but like thinking about people like things that are funny and people like things about pop culture. Pop culture is fun.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, the humor in this really stood out to me as well. I also was thinking about the way that like women's work is judged more harshly than men's work, definitely in Hollywood, but also in general. And so like you have this setup where you have all these A-list actresses who I'm sure are giving fantastic performances, but the entire time they're being compared to their male counterparts. Mm-hmm. So you have like Johansson's character, who, the best the best thing that a critic says about this is that, like she brings a sex appeal that Steve Buscemi never could, right?
Yeah,
which is funny, but highlights a really important thing. And then also like Jennifer Lawrence's character being referred to as a lady cop. It's like, you can't just call her cop. It's like,
right.
it's like the whole pantsuit thing. Why do we have to call it a pantsuit? It's just a suit.
Right. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the use of humor as a way to address really serious issues. Is that something you do a lot in your poetry?
It's something I try to do with varying success. I think it goes back to people thinking of poets as like the super serious or super sad or super emotional people. And I think that I can be all three of those things too, but I think that poetry can also be fun. And I sound like such a poetry is fun. Come on, we're going to write poetry. That's not like necessarily what I'm getting at. But I think that especially whenever you're first introducing poetry to people, you want to invoke some kind of a reaction. And I think if you can invoke like laughter, I think that's really attractive to people. It's like, oh, I read this thing and it was really funny. Like, I don't know. Whenever I read something funny, I want to like share it with people because it like impact. I was like, well, I want to give this laughter that I had to you. Like there was a thing on McSweeney's going around Christmas time that was about the sound of music. And it was like, this is what the Baroness, the Baroness, I can't think of her last name. Anyway, the Baroness would have said about like Maria, and it was funny. And so I was like sending it to all my friends and my family. And I think that is what's so attractive to me is like humor is something that kind of unites us. And I think if you can use humor and also talk about something that's really important, like the fact that women are paid 75 cents to every dollar that a man makes, like bonus.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, one thing that I hear a lot, and that I'm sure writers and artists in general find really frustrating is when people say like, oh, I don't really like poetry, or I don't really like literature because it's depressing or it's sad, right? Which to me means like you know you don't want to feel anything, but that's right. The point, right?
Yeah.
But if you can mask that serious stuff in humor, it becomes so much more accessible to people. And I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think it takes away from the message. I think it helps to spread the message.
Yeah, I think my goal has always been to, I don't know, be accessible, but also like make people think a little bit about what they're reading. I don't know. I mean, like Hollywood is like full of all these like all women remakes now, as everybody knows. And like, I'm all for those. I enjoy those. Like I go to the movies and I'm like, yeah, this is great. But I feel like a lot of it is just kind of very patronizing to me because like you said, it's just objectification of women. Like we can be like, oh yeah, girl power, but like the men did it first. And so there's always going to be that constant comparison of, well, when the boys did it, this happened, but now it's just a bunch of like hot women running around on screen. And that's fine, but like, that's not what I'm there for.
Right. And, I wasn't sure if my reading of this poem was right, but after you saying that, I think it might be, because I wrote down like one thing that I was thinking about was the way that capitalist entities co-opt the zeitgeist in order to sell shit. So, so you have this film that's supposed to be, or this, fictional film that you've created that's supposed to be about female empowerment, but the biggest concern really is selling tickets. So Jennifer Lawrence has to get shot in the boobs, right? So, so in a way I read this poem as kind of like a middle finger to people who like are progressive in name only, but are really just trying to make money.
Yeah. I think like feminism is great. I'm a feminist, but I think that once you start like exploiting it to make money, then that makes you a shitbag.
I couldn't have put it any better myself. Oh man. Okay. So what are you working on now? Like, are you still working at the emergency room now? Putting in hours there? I see you shaking your head. Yes. So like, what has that been like with the pandemic? Are you still finding time to write? Do you have the mental space to write right now?
Yeah, I have not written this summer. I have worked a lot at the emergency room. I'm actually going there like as soon as we get done here for another shift. But I think that doesn't give me space to write. But I think at the same time, like we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I don't know. I'm working in an emergency room with the pandemic, so I don't really expect to have time to write. Northwest Arkansas, after Memorial Day, I think like 2 weeks-ish after Memorial Day, we saw a 250% increase in COVID cases. And that made us like extremely busy. So as far as writing goes, like I do have things that I work on. I'm actually working on a Tarantino adjacent thing with blackout poetry. I printed off the script to Inglorious Bastards and I'm like blocking out words. And so I work on that. And that's kind of like something that I work on whenever I don't have a whole lot that I feel I can write about right now. Because the words are already there, right? I just have to make them make sense the way that I want them to. So I'm not writing a lot just because we are in the middle of a pandemic and I work in an emergency room, but I'm holding out hope that things will get better.
Yeah. Has there been any word from the University of Arkansas on what the fall semester might look like?
As of right now, the official word is that instructors get to choose whether we are in person or online. I have chosen to teach my classes online. I don't want COVID. I don't want to give anybody COVID. So I'm teaching online, and then I know that 2 of the 3 classes that I am taking are going to be online. So we're going to have to do online workshop, which is going to be interesting, but we'll figure it out.
Well, Ali, this has been so much fun. I really enjoyed talking to you. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.